Hey guys, we are talking absolute value inequalities today. This is going to be a quick overview of what to expect when you are working with these types of problems, okay? So when you are working with these, there are four basically types of answers you can get. And look, I'm doing four problems and I bet you there's going to be an example of each, okay? So you can have an or inequality answer, an and inequality answer, or you can get all real numbers or no solution, okay? If it feels like I'm throwing a lot of info at you, just go ahead and watch, and I bet you'll be like, oh, that makes sense, okay? So first of all, we're looking here. Oh, also I meant to say, obviously these are pretty simple problems, and you might have some more complex ones, right? So I will link some videos throughout of similar problems that are a bit more complex, and I'll also link a playlist at the end with a bunch of problems, okay? All right, but here we go. So we have the absolute value of x is greater than or equal to 4, okay? So what we need to remember about absolute value is it's asking for a distance, okay? It's asking how far is this number in here from 0, okay? So if I were to have the absolute value of 6, my answer would be 6, right? If I were to have the absolute value of -6, my answer would also be 6, okay? So for 2 seconds, we're going to pretend like this is an equal sign, okay? So if I had the absolute value of x equals 4, well, what could x be? X could be 4, right? And it could also be -4, right? Both of those numbers, if I plugged them in for x, I would get the answer 4. Okay, so as we're solving these absolute values, we need to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's just remember that when we're going to draw a number line. Sorry, is what I should have said. I know that if I had this as an equal sign, x could equal 4 or -4. So those aren't my only answers, but I do know that these numbers are important. So I'm going to graph them on my number line. Okay, so now what I'm thinking is I know the answer can be -4 or 4, right? Because if I plug that in, the absolute value of 4 is 4, and 4 is greater than or equal to 4, right? But what other numbers can work for this? Well, let's just kind of think about it. If I were to plug in something to the right of this 4, like a 7, right? Well, if I plugged in 7, the absolute value of 7 is 7, and 7 is greater than or equal to 4, right? So the numbers over here are going to work. The number's bigger than 4, right? Well, between here, if I were to plug in a 0, the absolute value of 0 would be 0, and 0 is not greater than or equal to 4. So these guys don't work in between there. But what about the numbers less than -4? What if I were to plug in a -100? Let's just be crazy, okay? If I plug in -100, the absolute value of -100 is 100, right? Which 100 is greater than or equal to 4, right? So when I solve this, any number that is less than -4 or -4 and 4 or greater will make this inequality true, right? It'll give me a number that is greater than or equal to 4, okay? So that is what my answer looks like represented on a number line. But what does it look like as written as an inequality or an interval notation, right? So in interval notation, sorry, we're going to write as an inequality first. So x can be any number less than or equal to -4, right? That represents this. Or x can be any number greater than or equal to 4, right? If I were to plug in any numbers that are represented by that, it would make this inequality true. Now, if you want this in interval notation, we would say you can plug in any number from -infinity, infinity always gets a parenthesis, right, to -4, and it can be -4, so we use a bracket. So that represents this side. Or it can also be from 4, I do a bracket because it can be 4, all the way to infinity. And we do a U to show that those are together, they're united, okay? So that's the same answer, just written two different ways, depending on how your teacher wants it, okay? Now, as you do these more and more, you may start to notice you can just set them up pretty easily. If your x is on the left side and you have a greater than sign, some people like to think of it as greater. So you're going to set up an or inequality when you have a greater than sign when the x is on the left side, okay? Greater, okay? All right, let's look at the absolute value of x is less than 4, okay? So this one doesn't have an equal sign underneath, which makes it a little bit different, right? But I'm still feeling like that -4 and 4 are significant, right? Because I know if I were to plug in 4 here, I would get the absolute value 4 is 4. 4 is not less than 4, but it's significant because it's the same number, right? Same if I were to plug in -4, I would get 4 is less than 4, okay? But since it can't actually be 4 and -4, I'm going to use open circles this time, okay? But then again, is it going to be the numbers bigger than 4, the numbers in between, the ones below? That's what we're trying to figure out, right? So if I were to plug in like 5, I'd get the absolute value of 5 is 5. 5 is less than 4, which isn't true, right? So these guys, nope. What about the numbers in between? So let's plug in 0. The absolute value of 0 would be 0. 0 is less than 4. Well, that's true, right? So these guys in here work. What about any numbers less than 4? If I plug in, let's do -50, I'd get the absolute value of -50 is 50. 50 is less than 4, which is not true, right? So these guys don't work either. So for this absolute value inequality to be true, I need to plug in a number between -4 and 4, not including those numbers, right? Not too bad, right? So let's go ahead and look at what this answer would look like. Again, written as an inequality, we could write it as x is greater than -4, right? And it also has to be less than 4, right? Because if I plug in 9, even though that's greater than -4, it's not less than 4, so it wouldn't work, right? That's why we have an and inequality. It needs to fulfill both of these, okay? So we can write it like that. You can also write it like this if you want to just have one x and feel fancy, right? Those are the same thing. And then if we wanted to write it in interval notation, we would say pick a number from -4, but we use a parenthesis because it can actually be -4. A number from -4 to 4, but it can't be 4, so we use a parenthesis to plug in 4x to make this inequality true, okay? All right, how are you feeling about that, okay? Remember how this one was greater to help you remember it's an or inequality? Well, some people like to think less than, right? less than, okay? If your x is on the left side and you have a less than sign, it's going to be an and inequality, okay? Just to kind of help you with that. All right, my other two scenarios, okay? What if we have a negative number here, okay? Remember I said whenever we have an absolute value, our answer is positive, right? It's 0 or above. We never have a negative answer to an absolute value, right? So let's just kind of think about this for a second. If I were to plug in 100, right, I'd get the absolute value of 100 is 100. Is 100 greater than or equal to -4? Yeah, it is, right? What if I were to plug in -40? If I plug in -40, the absolute value of -40 is 40. So I get 40 is greater than or equal to -4. Is that true? Yes, it is. I want you to think of any number you could plug in for x, and will it be true? Will it be greater than or equal to -4? It will, right? Because no matter what I plug in, I'm going to get a positive number, and a positive number is always going to be greater than a negative number, right? So I can plug in any number. So how do I write that? I write all real numbers work for this, right? Or the kind of, I don't know if it's really fancy, but you can write it with that like that. An R with those two lines means all real numbers. If you wanted this in interval notation, we say x can be any number from -infinity to +infinity, right? And we use parentheses always for our infinities, okay? Look at that. Okay, I bet you can guess what this one is. Okay, so on this one, I have the absolute value of x is less than -4. Okay, well, just kind of going back to what we did over here, if I take the absolute value of anything, I'm going to get a positive number, right? And is a positive number ever going to be less than a negative number? No, it's not, right? Not in this universe, at least, okay? So any number I try to plug in for x is not going to work. I'm not going to get a number less than -4. So in this case, there is no solution, okay? So whenever you have one of these absolute value inequalities, okay, once you get the absolute value by itself, if you have a negative number on the other side, your answer is either going to be all real numbers or no solution, okay? Now, you do have to be careful, because if I had something like -2 times the absolute value of x is less than -4, well, guess what? Before I really solved that, I would need to divide both sides by -2, right? Which ends up flipping that sign. So I would have the absolute value of x is greater than a +2, okay? So that's what I'm saying. If you get a problem and you see a negative there, don't automatically just be like, oh, is it all real numbers or no solution? Make sure the absolute value is by itself first. And then if it's still a negative number, if it doesn't go away like this one did, then you can get down to your, okay, is it all real numbers or no solution? Okay. All right. I hope this made sense. Okay. Like I said earlier, I'm going to link a whole playlist with lots of absolute value inequalities, because sometimes we have numbers inside the absolute value, right? Or kind of like this one, we have something being multiplied outside or added outside or subtracted, right? There's a lot of things that can be happening. So I will link that playlist if you need to check this out. But I hope this overview helped. Thanks.